as usual. The thing that I just opened disappears right when I do that. Okay, so hi anyone that is just starting to come live with us. Usually different services come live at different times. And as usual, I just lost my PowerPoint at the last second, but you probably know that, yeah. You probably... my PowerPoint at the last second. Okay, wait, you guys, sorry, I'm also getting feedback from somewhere, so give me 1 second. You probably... okay, wait, you guys, sorry, I'm also getting feedback from somewhere, so give me 1 second. Okay, did it stop now?
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's that.
Thank you guys. I'm sorry. As everyone knows, we have to have at least one tech issue per SASA live event. So it's always good that I get it away at the beginning when I'm the one still doing something. But like I said, I'm just not even going to share my screen because my PowerPoint disappeared at the last second. But just really quick to introduce everything. Hi, everyone. Thank you that is starting to join us. We're here for another SASA book club. Today we're doing Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So of course we have Jennifer Saint here, and then she is with Erica Stevenson, who's going to be her host, who is one of our Port Ancient partners for her YouTube account and Instagram page, Moan Inc. So she will be talking a little bit about that. So of course, go and follow all of their pages, which should be in the description boxes wherever you are watching this. And then it will of course be on the recordings posted after for anyone that is watching this afterwards. So thank you all for coming and joining us. The general rules are basically be nice about tech issue things. Don't forget to send in questions as we are doing this, and of course to have fun. So I think I'm just going to hand it over to Erica right away. So thank you guys for coming.
So, hey guys, what's up? I'm Erica, as Lauren just introduced, which is lovely. So thank you for the warm introduction for both Jennifer and I. I do a YouTube channel, as she said, which is called Moan Inc. There is a joke somewhere in there. It is supposed to be funny. I tend to think I'm funnier than I actually am. But yeah, so you guys can follow me on YouTube. I also have an Instagram, a TikTok, basically whatever platform I have it. No guarantee that I use it all the time, but I tend to post little videos modernizing like the ancient world, ancient Greece and Rome primarily. I have had Jennifer on the channel though, where we did a nice in-depth chat about Ariadne. So I'm really excited to do more so the general overview of the chat and of the book with you today. So do you want to start, Jennifer, by introducing yourself, maybe your classics background, and just telling everybody a little bit about the book?
Hi, thank you, and thanks for the introduction. So I'm Jennifer Saint, and this is my debut novel, Ariadne, and this novel tells a story that we all know. We've probably all heard it when we were children, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, but it's from the perspective of the woman who saved the hero and made everything happen. What happened to her before, what happened to her after Theseus came into her life. So it's a retelling from a feminist perspective. And I have always been interested in classics, and I've always loved the stories. Like I said, I read them when I was a child. I read them to my children, and I did my degree in classical studies at King's College in London, and that's really where the idea for the novel sparked all those years ago that I did my degree. And I wanted to add to what you were saying, Erica, that everybody should definitely follow Erica's Instagram, not just for what she said, but also the makeup looks that you do. Erica does amazing makeup versions of like bringing myths to life on her face, and it's incredible.
Thank you. They happened by accident, just so everyone knows. It wasn't a plan. I just accidentally like attacked my face with a brush one day and was like, oh, this works.
And it's great.
Thank you. I haven't done Ariadne yet, so we'll eventually do that character. But in the meantime, why don't you tell us what drew you to her character? Maybe I can take some inspiration from this.
Yeah. So I mean, the reason that I chose Ariadne as a character to tell this story about is because I really felt like she was somebody who was absolutely crying out to have her story told, and that's literally, she was crying out for it, because in Ovid's Heroides, the collection of letters that Ovid wrote from the perspective of female characters in mythology, he writes a letter in Ariadne's voice addressed to Theseus, and she says specifically in that letter, when you go back and you are bragging to those adoring crowds about how you slew the Minotaur, don't forget to tell them it was me. I was the one who taught you how to do it. And of course he did forget to tell them, very conveniently, of Ariadne's role. And so I felt that that was that was just something that needed to be done, that she really needed the chance to tell her side of the story. And I thought she was such a fascinating character from such a fascinating mythological family, and especially the women of the family, her mother Pasiphae and her sister Phaedra, have both got such brilliant stories of their own as well, that I really wanted the chance to incorporate and tell a little bit more about them as well. So yeah, all of those things came together, and that's why I chose her to write the novel.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. Like, especially with, like you said, the family. Like, she's not just an isolated person in this family. It's not just Ariadne, and then we kind of know a little bit. Like, for people who don't know the mythology about her entire family, like, it even goes further than that. We've got like famous men in her family. You know, like her Ariadne's grandfather is Helios, who's the Titan sun god. Her cousin would have been Medea then. Like, we've got this crazy family. So, but I imagine that with all of that, the research process for this book was probably mental. Do you want to talk us through how you started and how you managed to navigate all of that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's certainly like it started with Ovid's Heroides, and that was a jumping off point, but that is of course one short letter, and that takes place after the Minotaur has been slain, Ariadne talking from Naxos. So it's like a little snapshot of her life, but it's such a vivid scene, and she has so much feeling and so much passion and intensity in that letter that I thought it really gave a window into the kind of woman that she would have been, and how strongly she felt about things. And especially, I think, because the existing mythology, certainly like versions, like I would read a version to my children about, and it was very much focusing on Theseus and the action, you know, that he took. And who she was. So finding out more about her was so intriguing to kind of try and figure out, you know, other things that she'd done. So I started with Ovid's Heroides. For her sister, my sort of main text, the main reference I used was the Euripides play Hippolytus, in which Phaedra is a main character. And then really it's a case of, so I think when it comes to finding things out about these women in mythology, you're really piecing things together. So, you know, I would look at paintings of classical subjects, you know, try and find references in texts that deal with other characters where Ariadne or her family might be mentioned. So, I mean, the great thing now, I think, is that there are so many resources, because there's things like your YouTube channel, which is very accessible. There are all these podcasts that you can listen to. I think, you know, kind of finding out more about the mythological world is easier now than it's ever been. But I had a great big pile of books from my university degree that I'd kept. So I have a huge Oxford Classical dictionary that I always go to as the first port of call, and then kind of fleshing it out with art, with architecture. When we're not in lockdown, I would go to the British Museum and look, you know, at the Minoan display, the cabinets there, because that's where you're really trying to get, you know, it's not just the stories and the characters, but also trying to recreate the textures and the fabrics and the actual feel of this ancient Bronze Age world, which what we've got left of it is so fragmentary that it really, that was quite a challenging part of the research, I think. And when I was writing, it was thinking you really had to build that world around myself to try and, you know, get a sense of it across to the reader. So I really enjoyed that, and I think especially, like I said, in lockdown, it's great to escape to another world. But definitely, I think actually creating the details is probably the more difficult part than the story and the character in some ways.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, even going to the British Museum, like I know the exact cabinets that you're talking about, and they even have like a little layout of what like Knossos would have looked like, for example. And so you do get a feel for it, but like you said, you know, like the site itself, even I haven't been to the site, but seeing photos of it, there's not a lot of it left, you know. So there's a lot of imagination that you have to then throw into that based off of what you've read, which I guess could be fun. Did you find that was like a fun process to add in your own little magic? to those?
Yeah, really fun, because I think like the ancient world kind of exists in our imaginations when we go to these sites as something ruined and crumbled and very static, and like preserved for us to look at. So to kind of try and rebuild it and have it living and breathing and thriving around me, yeah, that's exactly what you want to do as a writer, I think, to immerse yourself in that.
So one of the questions that we have, though, which is basically on this topic, is what is your favorite podcast for mythological research?
Okay, I don't know if this has happened to you, Erica, but from my end, you just froze.
Okay, let me repeat that because you just froze as well. So,
okay, right.
Asking what your favorite podcast episode is for learning about mythology.
Oh, so for mythology, then I'm going to say that it would be Liv Albert's podcast, Let's Talk About Myths, Baby. So that's a very, kind of quite like a fiercely, unapologetically feminist take on mythology. And she's very direct, very honest, not suitable for children, I'm going to say, but really funny, really interesting. And I listened to that so much during last year. I think things like podcasts have been such a lifeline when we haven't been able to go out and do things the way we normally do. That's been really enjoyable. So yeah, I definitely recommend Let's Talk About Myths, Baby.
Liv is also so good. People who haven't listened to Liv, like she is just so smart. And you were on twice. You actually spoke about Phaedra once and then specifically about Ariadne. So for all of you guys who want to dive more into the characters, more like texture-wise, that doesn't make any sense, but text-wise, definitely check out both of those chats that Jennifer did, because they're both amazing. But speaking of Phaedra, why don't we talk about Phaedra? Phaedra is completely the opposite in your book to Ariadne, despite coming from the same like family. I want to say nucleus, but that's such a nerdy word to use for like system.
Fine.
But they're both from the same place, and how this one episode with the Minotaur affects them so differently. So what was your inspiration for writing Phaedra in the way that you did and taking her story to the place that you did?
Yeah, well, it was really important for me to have them together, have Ariadne and Phaedra together, because I don't know if it is anywhere else, but I certainly didn't find in any of the ancient sources these women actually interacting with each other. I found that they referenced one another in the plays or the sources that they are in, but I never saw them together. And that was one of the most intriguing things to me about these two women, that they come from this very very unique kind of family, very troubled and complex family dynamic, and how that would affect them as sisters was, to me, were like one of the central things that drew me to the characters. I think for both of them, what I knew about their stories sort of before I delved into them a bit more was I knew Ariadne in relation to Theseus, and I knew Phaedra in relation to Hippolytus. So I felt like their stories were really told through the lens of the more significant male characters that their lives like revolve around. But I mean, I have sisters. I'm one of three, and for me, that it shapes you as a person. The family that you come from is so important. And together. And I was definitely interested in why they were so different. That I think Ariadne, I feel, and certainly like the way she became in my novel, I feel like she's somebody who's much more of an idealist as a character, somebody who, when you kind of look at the things she did, that she risked everything to help Theseus, that she's somebody who wants to believe in other people, whereas Phaedra is a little bit more cynical and perhaps a little bit more jaded, understandably, by her experiences that she has later in life. And so I wondered how that would come to be when they come from the same family. And I don't know if there's a consensus on the age gap between them, so that was something I had to decide for myself. I think you often do kind of have to fill those details in, but I knew that Phaedra was the younger sister of Ariadne, and so that kind of led me to explore, well, in that case, perhaps Ariadne was somebody who might have known a life before the Minotaur came to their family, whereas Phaedra perhaps was born into a world where their monstrous half-brother already exists, you know, from when she's very young. And the Minotaur, for anybody who doesn't know, is inflicted on the family as a punishment from the god Poseidon. It's Pasiphae, their mother, who bears the brunt of that punishment by having to become the mother of this monster. But it's actually because of their father's insult to Poseidon that he tried to trick the sea god Poseidon by not sacrificing this bull to him, and therefore Poseidon decided to take it out on Minos's wife to humiliate Minos by association. So I thought, you know, that happening in your family, if you were a young woman growing up with that example, whatever it is that you do in your life might not be enough to keep you safe, might not be enough to protect you, because you might find that you bear the brunt, that you take the fall for a man's behaviour.
I mean, and that happens throughout a lot of different mythology. You know, it's not just exclusive to this story.
Not at all.
It's really fabulous that you drew that out in this story, because it is a very obvious, like, I don't want to say lesson, but I guess it is an obvious like lesson that you're putting forward, that it's like, this is something that they had to deal with. But even, you know, Theseus is unbelievably problematic, and yet he doesn't have to deal with any of his own problems. Like, it's the people around him who deal with the consequences.
Yeah, and that is such an interesting dynamic to explore as a writer, and I think that's one of the things that draws you into their stories. I think it's the burning injustice of it that makes it really compelling.
Well, with Theseus though, let's talk a little bit about him, because people, I mean, nobody knows my YouTube channel, so I'll just introduce that I did a review video of your book like a month and a half ago. So like literally when it just came out, I reviewed it. And my only like qualm with the book was that I felt like Theseus wasn't evil enough. And then when I spoke to you, I was like, no, I kind of get it now. It's been like 2 weeks, and maybe it's because it's Ariadne's story, which you said, yeah, exactly, it is Ariadne's story. Now I've thought about it some more, and what I think I realized, and I actually really appreciate about your depiction about Theseus, is that we're getting Theseus from Ariadne's point of view. So I was frustrated because I kind of liked him in the beginning, but we understand why Ariadne would have fallen for someone as terrible as Theseus, because even though there are red flags, like, you know, you write a description when she first sees him of him having like cold eyes, like that's a red flag, but she doesn't really notice it. She's like, well, he's really fit anyways. But I kind of, you know, I understand why she would fancy him in that scenario. Was that tough to write? Like, I'm curious now.
Yeah, it was really difficult to write, because obviously, you know, I think like Theseus has been certainly re-examined recently, and he's not coming out of it too well. I think a lot of people are looking at Theseus's behaviour and, you know, really finding it to be troubling. And you know, he did a lot of pretty terrible things. And one thing that Liv pointed out in my conversation with her is that whereas a lot of Greek heroes, you know, Greek mythological heroes are famous for killing monsters, Theseus is actually famous, apart from the Minotaur, which he slew, which is a monster, his other victims tended to be human victims, which I thought was a really interesting point to make about him. But obviously, what we know about Ariadne is that she wanted to help Theseus. And so when I came to put him in the story, he couldn't be somebody, you know, he's somebody who clearly has a particular vision of himself. And I was really interested in that idea anyway, the kind of the narrative of a hero, and the fact that in mythology, it is the fame and the glory that the heroes are seeking, you know, beyond anything else. That is what they want. They want their name to be remembered. And that's what Theseus is looking for. That is his whole aim in life. So for him, the human cost of that is not so important. And what he has to do in order to achieve that is worth it for him. But he's not going to see himself as the villain of his story. He's definitely going to see himself as the hero of his story. And so Ariadne gets to know Theseus from Theseus's view of himself. You know, he tells his own story to her. And that was such a difficult thing to do, something I really, really enjoyed doing. I think, you know, that was one of my favourite bits to write. because I was trying to put in those clues, those hints, those things that, like, you know, when you have a friend and she's really fallen for a guy and you're like, he seems to be bad news, and you really want to tell her. That's kind of, you know, what I'm trying to do as a writer with Theseus. You know, she's young, she's naive, and she's not had any contact with men before. And the men that she does know are her father, not a great guy, the Minotaur, you know, not his fault, but also, you know, her brother does feast on human flesh. So her sort of, the male role models in her life, apart from Daedalus, are not great. And so how is she going to identify when somebody comes along who has got all these impressive stories of all the brilliant things that he's done, because he's telling her what he's done, so obviously he's going to portray it in a positive light. She's not necessarily going to pick up on the fact that yeah, I think so. I talked about his cold eyes. I compared him to a shark. I just wanted to put in those little hints. And the other thing that I wanted to do was to, you know, people reveal themselves through what they say, sometimes unconsciously. And so while he's bragging about his heroic exploits, I wanted to put, as you mentioned before, Medea, Ariadne's cousin, in through Theseus's eyes. So because she's a very famous character and a lot of people know a lot about Medea, that was kind of a little clue to the reader that maybe Theseus isn't being completely honest, because when he talks about Medea, he talks about her being weak and cowardly, and that is something that we know that she is absolutely not. So for people who, you know, for classicists who know what's going on, I just wanted those little hints to be there to, you know, try and balance it, so it could be convincing that yes, Ariadne would help this man, but we know that he's not necessarily everything he's portraying himself to be.
Oh no, there's like mad bad juju with that man. Like as soon as he walks on the pages, I was like, something's wrong. Even though now, like I said, I get it a bit more. And also when I was thinking about it today, that, you know, right before that, as you say, the men that she knows, there's also the suitor who's come in, that her dad is like, you're going to go and this is now your new husband. So of course she's going to see Theseus and be like, I would much rather hang out with this guy than that.
Yeah.
So that also...
Yeah. She's not overwhelmed by options. And the other thing is that Theseus is offering to put an end to the slaughter. You know, the children are being sacrificed to the Minotaur, and she doesn't want to see that happen anymore. But as a young woman, how on earth is she going to stop it? Until Theseus comes along, what can she do to prevent the sacrifice from happening? So as well as, you know, him being attractive and him being glamorous and him being exciting, he's also a way to end the suffering that is taking place in Crete. And, you know, it seems like a better option than anything else that she's got on offer. Probably not.
But I mean, also going off of what you said about his references to Medea and all that, like, as like being weak. One thing that I loved about your portrayal of Ariadne is that even though there are moments where we really feel for her, so for example, when she sees the boat leaving Naxos and we're with Ariadne and we're like, oh my God, he's gone, she's by herself. Like, she's never seen as weak. And I think that's a really strong point of your writing, that no matter what she goes through, weak is never the word that comes to mind with her. So how did you manage that? How did you manage those really emotional scenes in the book? Because there are a lot, for those of you who haven't read it, there are a lot of emotional scenes. So how did you make her seem strong in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the scene that was kind of the starting point of the novel as well. You know, that's the scene that's in Ovid's Heroides. That was the scene I wanted to bring to life the most. You know, I think when I think of a book, I always have one scene really clearly in my head at the start that is kind of, I suppose, like the emotional heart of the novel. Yeah, I think I'm really glad that you said that she doesn't come across as weak, because that was really important to me that she didn't. But it was also really important to me that she didn't come across as that I wasn't going to go to the other extreme as well, because she is a woman living in a very patriarchal society. She is a woman living in a world where, you know, is ruled by men and gods, both of whom are cruel, who are capricious, who, you know, kind of visit a lot of undeserved punishment on the weak, on people who don't have the power. I guess that's it, isn't it? It's powerlessness is not necessarily the same as weakness, and that's I wanted to strike that balance that actually Ariadne has not got a huge amount of power to change the world around her, because the odds are overwhelming. She is one mortal woman. She's a descendant of the sun god, but she hasn't got sort of divine powers. And she's in a world which is very much a survival of the fittest, and the power is not in the hands of women. And I didn't want to kind of produce something that was sort of like a kind of like too twee, too sort of, I'm gonna make her like super strong and like completely kick-ass and able to defeat everything. But I also don't want her to be weak and simpering and incapable, because that's not how she comes across in any of the sources that we have here. And that's, she did something, what we do know about her is that she did something incredibly brave in betraying Crete, betraying her father, taking her life in her hands by helping the enemy. So she's absolutely not a weak character, but she is a character faced with really overwhelming odds as well. And so that was like a balance to keep in mind all the time.
Yeah, I mean, even when, she's by herself and there's little scenes where she's like looking for water, like basic things like that, where I was like, if I was in Ariadne's shoes right now, I would be lying on the ground, probably screaming up at the sky, being like, can it rain? Something, I need help, please. And she's just being a boss. She's trying to figure it out. And then thank God Dionysus shows up, which I was like, yes, been waiting for this. And Dionysus' character is so good when he bounces off Ariadne. How was it to write their dynamic between the two of them? Because it seems really fun.
Yeah, oh yeah, well, that was really enjoyable. I mean, it's so great to have a character like Dionysus to explore, because he is so much fun. There's obviously like a much darker side to his character, and there's various myths and plays and sources which deal with that as well, which I wanted to include. But I think the main thing that we think of when we think of Dionysus, and certainly for me, is that arrival to Naxos on board the pirate ship, where he has allowed himself to be captured by slavers, and he's waiting for the penny to drop. He's waiting for them to realize that actually they've kidnapped a god, and then he's gonna take his revenge. So he's kind of, he's toying with them in a really mischievous kind of way, and that was how I wanted to start with Dionysus, to get that playfulness. And yes, he's pretty merciless to people who cross him, who get on the wrong side of him, but he's such a, I suppose, like such a seductive character in Greek mythology. He's somebody that you really want to I saw him as being somebody so charismatic, so beguiling, which was harder to write than Theseus, but definitely, yeah, I think so. I think it's easier to write the more straightforward villain than to write the more kind of appealing characters sometimes. But I really, really enjoyed it, and I was, getting that dynamic between him and Ariadne it's like the lighter part of the novel. It's the sort of, much brighter, much more magical part, which I love to create, that kind of world around Dionysus where he just transforms everything.
I mean, we get to see him being a family man, which I love. So, like, we get to see him playing with his kids and just hanging out at home. I mean, he does disappear for extended periods of time, which I was like, come back, like, what are you doing? But he is at home and we get to see him do that. And then we do get to see his darker side. So he does oscillate a lot throughout the novel. So was that a process that, I imagine that was probably quite difficult to plot throughout the book, to make sure that we saw enough of him being light and a family man and fluffy, for lack of a better word, and then the dark parts of him with his followers in the whole mountain thing. I don't want to give too much away if people haven't.
Yeah.
But to have equally that those things balance out, and for us to not leave thinking he's all great or he's all bad. It's very neutral reaction to him.
Yeah, I mean, because he is so complex, and I think, if you're taking a character like Dionysus and trying to make him a character for a novel, You do really want to reflect those different dynamics that he has. But the way he's portrayed in mythology, sometimes he's young, sometimes he's old. He's very fluid in the way he presents himself all the time. And there's so many contrasting, conflicting aspects to him. And something that I found so intriguing about him is that he's alone in the gods. Like, he's somebody who can visit the underworld. He's the only one of them who does. He is one of the Olympians, but he's separate from them. He's different from them. And the traveling, obviously, that was kind of a nod to the fact that he has these more ancient roots in cultures other than Greece as well. That he's possibly like an imported god. He's got kind of worship that spreads much further across the ancient world. And so I really wanted to reflect that and have him going off to these places and exploring these places and being somebody who's constantly thirsting for like more adventure, new experiences. And so the family experience is like just another thing that I think he wants to have, that he wants to know. That there's that conflict where that he is immortal and he has an immortal family, which there's a kind of tragedy in that. I've just seen a message come up saying that I've gone echoey and that is there a problem with my microphone. So I'm just going to try microphone and hopefully that will help.
That's fine, yeah.
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 Okay, everyone. Great. Sorry about that.
We also have a question actually that just came to the chat, which was asked by, oh goodness, sorry, it just moved. I don't actually know who it's by, but either way, the question is, whoever asked this, thank you. Is the ending, which came as a surprise to this person, the known ending, or did you, Jennifer, choose your ending?
Yeah, so it does exist in mythology. So I did. So another source that I used was the Dionysica. So I got a lot of Dionysus sort of references from there. And yes, so without kind of giving away the ending for anybody watching who hasn't read it and doesn't know the ending, yes, the ending is a story that has been told about Ariadne. I think it's not the most well-known ending. I'm treading really carefully with what I say. It's not the most well-known ending. It was the ending for me that really fitted, and I just saw another question pop up which kind of like incorporates into it. I know I'm not supposed to be reading them myself, but basically, the theme that I was exploring with this novel, the major kind of what I was referencing through all the women's stories that I touched upon, the main women and the kind of other women that I referenced, is that ultimately these women end up paying the price for men's behaviour. And for Ariadne, there are versions of her story where that happens to her, and there are versions of her story that end differently. And yeah, when I was making choices about what to do, the ending was actually something I knew I was going to choose that ending from the beginning. That was something I wasn't in doubt about. And this is something I think about writing a debut novel in particular, is that when I was writing this, I didn't know that anybody was going to read it. So my goal with writing this book was to write a complete draft of a novel. And I told myself at the time, if I can write a whole book, that's my goal. That's the thing that I want to do. So when I was writing, I didn't really think about what will people think of the choices that I make. That's something that now people ask, and oh yeah, now I'm trying to explain the thought process behind it, which I just picked the story that I really wanted to tell, I think.
But also, I think a lot of people don't realize with mythology in general that there are so many alternate endings, yes. There are so many alternate tales, and especially online, I always see people bickering, being like, that's not the correct ending, this is the ending. They're actually all talking about correct endings. Like, they're all correct, everything that they say. It's just, people don't realize that these stories have been written over hundreds of years, maybe, depending on when the next one is written or the next painting is done. So we get new people interpreting and writing the way that they think the story fits best. And so I think that, when you take these liberties in a book and you choose your story, as long as it matches up to some story from mythology, it's fine, you know?
Well, yeah, I think there's kind of a temptation to it, I suppose, because we have like a lot of 5th century tragedies, don't we, surviving kind of intact. And you sort of look at those and kind of, I think it can be quite tempting to see those as like, that's the definitive version. But, even with the tragedians who were writing, like maybe 100 years apart from each other anyway, they're telling stories from their ancient history. And so, the way that things have been passed down to them, and we don't know the kind of choices that the ancient writers are making. And there's so much, I suppose, that's been lost as well, that we don't know all the things that they were choosing between. So yeah, there is absolutely no kind of like, this is the official story. There are multiple versions, and they've all been told for different reasons, different purposes to, I think reflecting so much about the culture of the time that they're being told in as well. I always find that so interesting, the way that these characters pop up again and again, and especially when you're talking about like a god like Dionysus who's immortal. And so that people are free to tell such a plethora of stories about this character, that you end up with like so much to choose from.
Yeah, that, and also like to see where the author's from as well, and like to see what was directly impacting that author, like what battle had just happened. So it's going to shape their characters and their portrayal of gods, especially like, if you think a god is going to be on the other side, and let's say they were fighting a city whose patron deity was Dionysus, and then this guy is writing about Dionysus, he's going to have a very different view of that god than the other city. So it's always interesting when you read those myths to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, and with Theseus as well, obviously the Athenian stories of Theseus, he's our patron hero. He's absolutely great. Everything he did is brilliant. Everybody else, no. He's definitely not.
And that's the thing, literally everyone else, people who don't know, everyone else who's not Athenian that writes about Theseus hates him. Like Plutarch especially, you can read his in-depth study about how much he hates Theseus. It's brilliant. It's so good. Yeah. But it's good for those reasons as well. That's what I love about the ancient world. That's what I love about as well in your book, that all of the characters in your book are very three-dimensional as well. Like even Phaedra is such a three-dimensional character in your book. Like you understand her struggle, like sometimes the way that she retaliates even towards Theseus when he comes back, and she's quick with him and all of that. Like you get it because there's so much to them. And it's a very ancient way of presenting characters, which I love.
Thank you. I mean, I think that is what you want to do, isn't it? If you are writing about the ancient world, you want to make these characters like living, breathing characters, and you really want to get inside their heads. And I think, the fun of thinking about how they are not just in those big moments that we know from mythology, but what they're like in their day-to-day lives as well. That's part of the draw, I think, to actually see them as whole people.
And I think what you were saying before about how we don't know like what previous authors were choosing from, because there's probably a plethora of writing about these characters. But then you think, well, maybe it was somebody, like, did somebody just write like a story of just Theseus going about his day and eating his lunch and breakfast, and we just don't have that like survives? Like I always wonder those things where I'm like, was that somewhere? So they all understood his character really well, and we don't,
Somewhere there's this like great justification of Theseus that has not survived.
Or even these other characters when they describe Ariadne like finding breakfast on Naxos, like maybe in yours, maybe the vines start appearing and then she eats all the grapes, which by the way I loved. That was like the main inspiration for my makeup look, by the way, is all the vines.
Yes.
I was like, ooh, I want to use that because Jennifer wrote that in her book.
Oh, great. And it looked amazing.
Well, I thought that the imagery in your book as well was so good because you incorporated is the word, that's it. You incorporated so many different little ancient things, like when Phaedra goes to Athens and we see the city, for example, and even on Naxos you have like the little fountain that she has. There are all these like little tidbits that call back to the ancient world. Were those things that you knew you wanted to put in, or were they details at the end that you were like, oh, I'll do a little bit like those little setting details to really paint the image?
Did I freeze then? Or is it just right? Okay. So yeah, sorry. Again, always happens with Zoom. Yeah. So no, I knew I wanted to include those kinds of things. That was just that was like the joy of writing as well, and knowing, I think, that if anyone was going to read it, like, to be able to put in little Easter eggs for people who know mythology and know classics. I found that so satisfying to do.
I mean, and all of us found them. Like, we all have like this little group chat for people who don't know, like little Instagrammers, like classic Instagrammers, we have a group chat, and we were all talking about it in there, being like, did you see this one? But we have another question, which just says, how did you choose the cover designs for your book? Yeah, they are very different. They're very beautiful, each of them. But how did you choose both of them? Did you choose both of them? Did someone choose both of them?
Yeah, I mean, so I got sent them through. So yeah, so I was asked for my opinion about both of them, and I mean, it was like the easiest yes I've ever said, obviously, because they're both amazing. I was so interested by how different UK and American book covers are. It sent me down a rabbit hole of comparing like loads of other books that I had like on my bookshelves, like, oh, I'm going to look at the American version and see how it's different. And yeah, I feel so lucky because they are so different, but I really love them both. So there are kind of a couple of early versions. So both the cover designers kind of submitted a range, I think, though I'm not sure how many versions there were of the American one. There were definitely about 8 of the UK one. And yeah, some of them really, the first one I saw was really, really different. It still had the gold foiling, but is like a completely, really different design. And then it was such a privilege to see them evolve as the designers kind of came back with more and more ideas. And something that I didn't know is that cover designers, certainly the ones who design this, they read the book as well. You know, I thought they might just be given a brief, like, you know, here's like a summary of the story. But I think that's why there's so many nice little details in. They're real works of art.
Well, I mean, this one, if for those people who don't have this UK one, if you're in the US and you're watching, like this one, even within the vines, there are like little boats. Like,
yeah.
It's so beautiful. It's so intricate. And the American one, as I can see, that is the American one, right?
Yeah, that's the American one. Yeah. Yeah. And it's
like, that calls back to Helios. So that's really nice as well.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And also that, you know, Ariadne's crown in the constellation, and there's little stars in the background and the pillars. So there's loads of really nice little details in there. So yeah, like a bit more closely, which are lovely. So yeah.
Different designers who did them?
Different designers, yeah. So Joanne O'Neill did the American one, and Michaela Alcayano, and I'm really sorry to Michaela if I've said her name wrong, which I might have done, I probably have, in the UK. And they are amazing, amazing designers who I think have both been nominated for awards for their work.
They should be, because they also both perfectly encapsulate the book as well. So
yeah,
you know, with one of them showing more so like Dionysus's influence, the other one really drawing attention to Ariadne's face is legit on it. So yeah. I mean, to be fair, if I walked into a bookshop and saw either of them, I would probably buy them.
Yes, same.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. Even though we shouldn't do that, everybody, we should not be buying a book based on its cover. Oh, we have another long question. Okay, let's see if I can read this out loud. Dear Jennifer, I would like to ask you how you managed to recreate the environment of the classical world in your novel. It is difficult for fiction writers to recreate worlds in which we haven't lived, and you've done a really nice job bringing classical Greece back to life.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind. Yes, it was like I said. I think the atmosphere is something, you know, I could really imagine. I think through reading ancient texts, you can really sort of feel the mood and the kind of feeling of the ancient world. So I knew what tone I wanted to create. Then building up the textures and building up the sensory details was where I would find that kind of perhaps, you know, a really short paragraph might take about an hour of looking things up to actually write it, because I think and I think like you'll find this with any writers of historical fiction, that you sort of you think, right, so my character is in a room, and then you kind of thinking, okay, so what are the floors made of? What are the rugs made of? What might they have on the walls? What does the furniture look like? What do they eat? There's not a huge amount, I don't feel, about really kind of the day-to-day diet in the Bronze Age. You think, you know, from like Homer, they eat like big platters of meat all the time, and that's mostly what Homer describes. And so I did use the Odyssey and the Iliad quite a lot. The Odyssey more because there's more domestic settings in the Odyssey. So I have a couple of translations of it. And I love the difference even between, you know, two different translators of the same text. You get different details that they both draw out. And so I would go through and make notes about the materials that they mention, you know, so like when Telemachus goes to Menelaus's palace in Sparta in the Odyssey, I was really kind of like jotting down, well, what does he see there? What does a Bronze Age palace look like? What kind of things can I include? Along with obviously looking at pictures of Knossos, of the ruins that we've got, of the frescoes that we've got, those beautiful like crimson pillars. So all of that, I was just trying to gather it from everywhere that I could. And like I said, when I couldn't go to the British Museum, the great thing is now you can take virtual tours of all of these places. So, you know, you can see, you can, even if you can't go and see it in real life, if you don't have access to it, you can see pictures of the collections online and build it up from there. So yeah, so I think probably some of the sort of smallest, probably most inconsequential bits of the novel might have actually taken the longest to research, because it would just send me down this like, what's this kind of rabbit hole. But it's completely worthwhile, because that is exactly what you want. You want the world to be convincing, and you want it to feel three-dimensional. So it's completely worth the time.
To be fair, I've never thought of those things. Like, I read those things all the time, but I've never thought of like, what would the rug have been made out of? You know, like, I know that there's a certain wall painting, but I don't, like, that's just not my area of expertise. So I'm like, great, there's a blue monkey on that wall, fantastic, moving on. But like, thinking about what actually is that material, like, what does that look like? Like, how bright would that color have been? You know, those sorts of things.
Well, the colours is really, because I mean, your first image is the statues that obviously we see, and like when you go and you look at the Parthenon marbles and so on, the paint's all been lost, hasn't it? So we do think, I mean, I think kind of, I sort of automatically think of things as being like white, you know, the statues and everything, but of course they would have been so brightly painted, and that's where you do have to use more of your imagination to those little tiny traces of color that we still have that give you an idea of what it could have been like.
Well, I know that in the Parthenon Museum in Athens, well, when I went back in like 2016, they have these like statues now that they can like project like the colors onto it, so that as people walk by, they can see what it looks like now and what it would have looked like, which I love. Like, that's so cool. I stood by it and I was like, stop, this is great.
And we're so lucky to have, you know, that you can go and see things like that. I think it's such a privilege to live in the time we do now.
Exactly. Like, for the things that you say, like from Homer, you saying that you have different translations. I think that's something that, you know, let's say that, you know, people who are watching don't know ancient Greek or Latin. That is fine. If you buy two translations of the same book, they will focus on different things and they'll highlight different things, or like the blue that's written somewhere might be like cerulean in the other, you know, like little things like that really bring that world to life. So definitely read more than one translation as well.
I think that's probably the crucial thing, like to write about it as well, is to not depend on just one, definitely, and to just, you know, the difference in the feel and the tone that just like a single word choice can make is quite amazing, really.
Yeah, there's a new translation. It's a little bit off topic of Ariadne, we'll get back to it, but there's a new translation of the Odyssey by Emily something.
Yes, Emily Wilson.
Yes, I haven't read it yet because I've been plowing through my 8 copies of the Iliad. I'm currently on the 4th translation. But apparently she uses a lot of different words from the Greek, which is causing a bit of a ruckus in the classics community. And they're like, oh, how could you use this word? but it just shows that it changes the whole tone of the world. And, oh no, that wasn't a question. So the person who asked the question before just said thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question.
Also, if anybody has any more questions, we still have 10 minutes, so you're more than welcome to still send in your questions if you have anything that you want Jennifer to answer, because I could literally, I'm a chatty Cathy, I can talk for ages, so so don't worry. But yeah, definitely with all of those different translations and everything, even with Ovid, like I imagine reading, did you read the Ariadne story in different translations, or did you just have the one as well?
Yeah, so I did read a couple of different translations of it. I really came back to my like beloved university copy, because like that's the one that's where I remember like sitting in that lecture when we were introduced to the Heroides, and like my mind was blown that somebody had done this back in the ancient world, had like given these women a voice. I thought this is amazing. So that is a translation that I love the best, I think, just because it's the first one that I had, and obviously I've forgotten who translated it, because that obviously would happen. I would have his name like on the tip of my tongue, but it's completely gone.
Oh no, sorry, I thought that was a question. That was just a note.
All right.
What's happening? Sorry. You know, but I have my like major copies, which I just won't part from. Like my copy of the Aeneid, for example, doesn't have a cover anymore, but I refuse to, like I have other ones which I go to when I need them, but I refuse to completely get rid of those copies, especially with Ovid's Heroides. Like you said, like it's a text that really highlights women's voices in a time when they didn't get it. And I think that oftentimes in classrooms we overlook these texts that really show women at the forefront. And Phaedra also gets a moment in the Heroides as well.
Yeah.
Did you do that one when you were also writing her story?
Yeah, I did, and that was really useful, because actually that one contrasts quite a lot to the Euripides play, which I said obviously I referred to a lot because that's like that tells more of her story. But the great thing about Phaedra's letter in the Heroides is I think it really shows how clever she was. The way that she constructs an argument to Hippolytus. It's so persuasive. It's like she's got these incredible rhetorical techniques that she uses. And she's also really bold and really defiant, and she calls out the gods in the letter, and she says, you know, what I want to do is no worse than what the gods do. In fact, they behave much worse all the time, which is a fairly shocking thing to say, you would think. But yeah, Ovid's version of her is completely unafraid to say these things. And so that was, yeah, a huge part of the way that I constructed her character. But the other thing about it is that really made me wonder about Phaedra and the impact that her childhood in particular would have had on her, is that the whole letter is like a kind of almost like she's a lawyer constructing an argument to Hippolytus of why you should fall in love with me. And while it's a great letter, that's absolutely not how people fall in love. You cannot argue somebody into loving you. And so I thought it really kind of sort of unwittingly for her casts her in a light of somebody who perhaps is a little bit emotionally kind of almost stunted in a way, which makes perfect sense given who her husband is and the kind of life that she's led up till that point. But I thought that was like a real way into her personality for me. Yeah,
especially because it's her point of view, which I think is key as well from all of them. It's kind of like your novel, that you see them from an I perspective, like I think.
Yeah.
Them a whole different depth. Oh goodness, we have lots of questions.
Yeah, I've just seen like a few more coming in.
Okay, so we have one that says, now that you've published the novel, if Ariadne was novel number 2, yes, that is exactly what it says. Would it be in any way significantly different from the finished product?
If I was to write it again,
I think so, but it does literally say if Ariadne was novel number 2, so yeah, possibly.
Yeah, I suppose so. Ariadne is the first novel that I've written, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I suppose this is the thing about writing a novel about the ancient world, writing a novel based on mythology, is that you really do feel like you could write about 6 different versions of it. I think, you know, I could go back and write Ariadne's story and make her completely different, because I think that what exists about her would lend itself to multiple different interpretations. Like we're saying about translations, you could, you know, so yeah, I could, I mean, I definitely won't write it again. But yeah, you know, it's almost like a choose your own adventure book. I could go back and everywhere I made a choice, I could make the other choice, and that would, yeah, you could end up with something completely different. I don't know if that answered the question, so if not, you can clarify, like come back, send another message.
We have another question though, which is, it's just Dionysus raising the dead. Where did this come from?
So, well, I mean, that's he famously did journey to the underworld to bring back his mother. So Dionysus, as a son of Zeus, you know, an illegitimate son of Zeus, obviously incurs the wrath of Hera, and his mother in particular incurs Hera's wrath, because that was the approach that she took. So when her husband had an affair, often not what we would call an affair, but sometimes with a mortal woman, then, you know, again, she would take the blame for Zeus's behavior. Hera would punish her instead. So Dionysus' mother is tricked into inadvertently killing herself by Hera, sorry. And Dionysus doesn't take it lying down. I think that story again kind of gave me an insight into the kind of character of this god, whereas the other Olympians they're not going to go to the realm of Hades. You know, he's not the underworld is his and the other gods don't go there. But for Dionysus, he's going to go where nobody else would. He's going to do the things that other gods don't do. And he really exists on that kind of, you know, he plays with that barrier between life and death in various stories associated with him, which I think is, you know, really plays into the fact that he's such a contradictory character of so many contrasts.
And to that person who's asking that as well, if you go to Ovid's Metamorphoses, you can read Semele's myth, where he does and get his mother, if you so want to go and do the research. If not, that's fine, but just in case you want to, you can go and read it. I love that myth personally, but yes, we also have one last question. Actually, it's from Lorna. Hi, Lorna, since you're watching. How much of what we read in the final book did you plan from the beginning, and how much evolved as the writing progressed?
Oh yeah, good question. And so Ariadne's story, I think it was largely unchanged from the first draft. So it was obviously developed in kind of rewriting and editing, but the kind of the structure of her story, I was very clear in my mind what was going to happen to her from beginning to end when I started. So that was more kind of it like I deepened it, I added more detail, enriched it, hopefully, you know, putting more layers to her character, going through rewrites. But her story was something that I just knew that I was going to stick to it. That what really changed was that Phaedra wasn't a narrator in the first draft at all. She didn't have any chapters. I had her kind of come in later and tell her story to Ariadne, but it just didn't work that way. You know, she's somebody who we really needed to be in her head, and we really needed to see her story from much earlier on. It didn't work as a kind of a retrospective, here's what I've been up to for the last 20 years. So I thought it was really worthwhile and valuable kind of giving her the chance to like explore more in more detail what she actually went through.
Lauren, are we allowed to do anything else, or is that it for time?
No, if you have any final questions or anything, feel free to keep chatting. I am going to come back on it, like basically when you guys are done, to just do the screen sharing that I was going to do at the beginning. Show our social medias and stuff really quick. And just so you guys know, I was sending the links in the chat for like your guys' social medias, where to get the book, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully everyone can find those links, and everything will be saved and recorded on the platform, like SASA's Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, where it already was. So feel free to keep chatting for a few more minutes.
Sure. So one of my questions was then, if you could direct somebody who wasn't into mythology, who hadn't studied mythology, Jennifer, to one source that you thought was probably the best, like, first stop shop for myths, which book would you recommend that they buy?
I think I would say Ovid's Metamorphoses, because I think you get a think that is what Greek mythology is kind of all about, even though it's obviously Roman. But it's all the stories, you know, from the creation of the world, you know, all the way through. You get all the characters that you will have heard of, that you'll have some ideas about, and it's all woven together, you know, connected by this theme of transformation, or, you know, how the world is transformed, how people are transformed, how the gods are transformed. I just think it is such, you can dip in and out of it as well with the metamorphoses. So I would say that would be a really great place to start.
I agree. It's lots of short stories.
Yeah.
Who don't know, so you can literally just come in, read one that's like 2 pages, and you get a myth. Congrats! And then you can walk away knowing something, rather than having to sit through, because it does look a bit thick. Won't lie.
Yeah.
But it is just a lot of short stories. And Ariadne, God, I can't remember what book she's in, but she's in there. So
Yes, yeah. And I was going to say, oh, I think I know, but I'm not going to say because I'm probably wrong, and then somebody will come back and say, no, you don't know.
I mean, there's a million stories in there. So we also get lots of Theseus hopping off and doing his thing. So
yeah.
Okay, so I actually wanted to ask a question really quick too, from the book cover things, because you were saying that it was interesting learning about like the difference between what like is on an American book cover versus a UK one. And to me, I would have totally thought that it was opposite. Like if I didn't already know, because you had sent us the images, that the American one was the shiny one.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's so like screams American to me. Like people would buy it because it's shiny. So, or I would, maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I do think they both look really cool, but I'm just slightly interested of like how that works. That's just so crazy to me, and I guess it makes sense, but I guess I don't personally see the things that are like, oh yeah, I totally understand why an American would like this one better. But they're both beautiful. So
and so like some people have like ordered, if you're in America and you really want the UK cover, Blackwell's bookshop actually shipped for free from the UK. So some people have contacted me and said, how can I get the UK cover in America? And yeah, Blackwell's will ship for free if anyone wants that version.
I think also Waterstones ship it as well. I think that's how my friend in Australia got it.
Oh, right.
Shipped the UK one from Waterstones, if anybody wants to do it that way. I don't know if it's for free though, but I know that you can get it that way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then we did send a link in the chat that is the one that Jennifer's team provided of like you can pick your like favorite bookstore to like get it from through there. So those should all be in the chat. And then sorry, I had to interrupt to say that because I just thought that was so interesting, and now I want to look up like every single book that I have and see what the different covers are, right? And also, so do you have any last thoughts, or I'll just screen share for like 2 seconds really quick? And then we'll kind of be done. So thank you everyone who was coming. And if you will bear with me for a second, it's some of the links that I just sent in the chat too, so I can slightly explain what I was sending. But what I missed at the beginning was saying what SASA is. SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance, which I assume most of the people watching know, but we also get a lot of people watching our stuff afterwards, especially on YouTube and Facebook. So of course our mission is to reverse the downward trend in the study of the ancient world. So you can find out more about that on every page of our website, and we have a ton of projects and are doing actual research for a white paper about that. Really quick to show our social media outlets, follow us on socials. Oh, I forgot to add Discord to this one. We also have a Discord server where once you just like the terms and conditions we have, then you can kind of just openly chat things there. There's also a channel for like self-promotion where you can share your YouTube page. So Erica, go on there, right? So you can share your YouTube pages and like things like that. And then one of the links that I just sent in the chat was for our art competition that is closing next week. So basically for this, you send in artwork that is kind of stuff inspired by the ancient world from any culture, basically almost any time period. We have a very broad definition of ancient over at SASA. And then they'll be featured on our bazaar, and we're announcing the winners during our virtual conference, which I did not put a slide up here for, and I should have, but the virtual conference is in a few weeks, August 15th and 16th, and it's free and open to everyone, and it's focused on like independent scholars speakers are mostly the people who are presenting in it, and of course some great keynote speakers and things. So we would love to see you guys at those kinds of things, which you all can RSVP to on the events page. It has some roundtable things and the general conference things, and of course more reading groups and book clubs coming up. So that is everything that I was going to say at the beginning. So thank you very much, guys. And on that note, I think this went so well. Erica, you were asking amazing questions that were like very great, of like insights on how you write a novel and things like that, that I personally wouldn't have thought of. I've been like, okay, so tell me all the feminist things that you thought about while writing this. As anyone who knows me knows. But so on that note, now that we're already a few minutes over, thanks for bearing with us, you guys. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend, everybody. Check out Erica's page, check out Jennifer's pages, and we'll see you all next time. Okay, bye. Bye. I stopped the recording and